Sports Integrity Week, day 4. Ben Jacobs with you throughout the course of the week. Use that hashtag SIW. And don't forget as well, it's all about engaging with us. We've got some super panels this afternoon. And through the app, you can ask your questions. I should also add that SIGA is a non-profit organisation. So we are seeking donations throughout the week. A QR code is going to flash up periodically in the bottom of your screen and on the social handles as well. Just don't be fooled by my shirt, though, which looks like a QR code. So if you are to sync it up with your mobile phone, then you're going to have to point to the bottom of the screen rather than directly at my chest. But do also tell us where you're watching from. And in addition, if you are asking questions, please give your name and your job title as well. Technology is one of our themes today. And then tomorrow we wrap things up with a full program from all over the world as well. I'll have details on that a little bit later for you. But let's move on with one of our flagship panels. I'm really looking forward to this one. Its title is Operation No More Abuse in Sport, using technology and real-world tactics to prevent racism and other forms of abuse. Our moderator is renowned in his field, and he's built a stellar panel who he'll introduce in just a moment. But I'm absolutely delighted to welcome this afternoon Shimon Cohen, the chairman of the PR office and also communications director for Prince Ali bin Al Hussein's AFDP Global, who have done some tremendous work all over the world fighting injustices and abuse, including quite recently and over the last few years in Afghanistan with the Afghan women's national team. Shimon, it's a very good afternoon to you. Thank you for joining us, and it's over to you to introduce the panel.
Ben, thank you very much indeed, and good afternoon, everybody, and good morning to those of you tuning in from the United States. Global sport has seen a huge, dramatic rise in incidents of racism, homophobia, anti-Semitism, and indeed other forms of abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, leveled at players, executives, and other representatives of sports club. The internet and particular social media platforms has allowed these incidences to flourish, and often with impunity. And the combination of increasing incidents of both online and in-stadium abuse is now being shown and proven to be significantly impacting player performances, club and league reputations, and in turn, the commercial side of sport. I'm delighted and honored to be chairing this panel. And we're going to explore how AI, artificial intelligence, and machine learning technology can be used alongside real-world policing tactics to prevent such forms of abuse in sport, and in turn creating an environment which can sustain player performances and maximize the role of sport to act as it is supposed to, as a force for good. We have limited time. We'll be using the session to drill into instances of abuse, and football is going to be the example, but it is only an example because we are this is common to pretty much every sport. Our panel members, I'm delighted to welcome Sir Mark Rowley, who is a director of Quest Global, also former assistant commissioner and national lead on counter-terrorism for the Metropolitan Police in London, United Kingdom. Welcome, Mark. Richard Cabourn, the Right Honourable Richard Cabourn, former Minister of Sport in the United Kingdom. Richard is perhaps the most authoritative voice in sports administration today. Absolutely delighted to have you with us, Richard. Jonathan Hirschler, co-founder and chief executive officer of the Signify Group. They're market-leading AI specialists who have developed capabilities to capture abuse from social media, to flag it, report racist accounts and groups, and provide protection for sponsors, brands, players, and indeed fans. Jonathan, welcome. And Sanjay. Sanjay is the chairman of Kick It Out. He has a background in technology. Kick It Out is, as we will all know, primarily a campaigning organization working alongside all the authorities to enable, together with the clubs, players, fans, communities, to enable us to tackle all forms of racism. I'm Shimon Cohen, chairman of the PR office in London. Absolutely delighted to be here. Now, this panel comes hot on the heels of research released by Sanjay's Kick It Out, which identified a 40% increase in reports of discrimination in football and a more than 50% spike in racial abuse. Sanjay, to kick this off, in your opinion, how does all of this differ from the abuse of the 1980s that I remember very well, tuning into football, match of the day, and watching bananas raining down on the pitch as Viv Anderson of Nottingham Forest took to the pitch?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I'll share some of the research as well from the output from the research in the annual reports. I mean, just to turn to your question first, how is it different? Well, it's kind of it's different and the same. I think you have to look at the challenges around racism and other forms of discrimination in the context of the rest of society, and I think it's a mistake to think of things in straight line terms, and that's part of the challenge. You know, if I were to compare where we are in football today to where we were when I started watching back in the 1970s, of course it's better. Of course we're in a better position than we were in the 1970s. But if I compared it to 2012, we're much worse. And 2012, in particularly in this country, is a high watermark because of the feel-good factor we had in this country around the Olympic Games. And when you look at things like the national hate crime statistics from the Home Office, actually our statistics over the last 5 years, which show an increase in hate in football, mirror and correlate with the increase in hate crime in accordance with the Home Office's hate crime statistics. So when people say, is it a football problem? Is it a societal problem? Is it both? Of course it's both. But football in the UK is our national religion. So it plays out in our national religion in the way in which you would expect, because it is intensely tribal. And in many ways, part of the problem is that the rest of society has become what football always was, which is intensely tribal. And so we are, in these identity bubbles. It's, things like, Brexit and similar things around the rest of the world. It's not just, I think Brexit is a symptom, but it's a symptom of that divisiveness in society as we've moved into more open or closed rather than left or right, though that seems to be the essential social divide. Are you open or are you closed? What our report showed, the figures are on the screen, increases in reports of discrimination, increases in racial abuse, increase in homophobic abuse. We've always known that this is just the data that's reported to us, the complaints that we receive. We've always known that we only have the tip of the iceberg, so we created this YouGov poll as well to get a sense of what's below the waterline. And so, the fact that, really pull out this 71% have seen racist abuse aimed at a footballer on social media, that really is a shocking statistic. And it shows that abuse is now ubiquitous and it has become normalized on social media. And there is something about social media and something about online that it creates the mirrors the anonymity of a crowd. You can be anonymous in a crowd and be abusive. Actually, social media enables that same anonymity, but with the added twist that it gives you direct contact with the intended victim. If I wanted to, I can DM Wilfred Zaha or Ian Wright on Instagram, which I can't do in a stadium. And that's what we're seeing. And that's why we're, to play into some of the themes that we're going to be talking about later on, particularly theme number one there. What we're really calling for is better data sharing, because we think better data will get better insights and better solutions. I won't steal the thunder of everyone else.
So indeed, that is the scene setter, and the issue that we're here to discuss is how technology can play a role in combating abuse. We're hearing all the time, absolutely, how technology is the vehicle for the abuse. But Jonathan Hirschler of Signify, AI specialists, tell us how has the role of technology changed?
Well, Sanjay has just sort of teed up the picture, and it is a big issue at the moment. Everything on Sanjay's iceberg, the sort of everything that's been reported is the tip of the iceberg. Everything underneath it is, to your point, Shimon, that's social media and all of the abuse that's going on below that waterline, and it's massive. The amounts that we've been able to identify using our systems are absolutely massive. So we've set up an AI machine learning driven service that is able to look across different networks. And that's one of the issues. There are so many different networks, abuse is coming across from different places. And we're able to tie that together and understand what the full picture really looks like. the technology to date, to answer your question directly, technology to date, the way it's being used by clubs, and I'm talking in football, but of course this is wider than that, and we're looking across sport here. But technology has been used in such a way whereby the abuse happens, something takes place, an incident takes place, and then it's a case of reacting to that. And social media, AI technology, the kind of technology that we've set up, we have a platform called Threat Matrix, which we've set up to look specifically at this issue. It's able to capture abuse, it's able to identify where it's coming from, it's able to take a look at the whole picture, the wider picture, to identify the networks, the amplification, how it works, who it's targeting and how. And we have been working for the last 18 months to develop this initiative in order to try and provide evidence to clubs, to management teams, to officials, to authorities, and to social media networks, so that they can do something about it. So it's been a reactive technology response so far by the clubs, and the conversations that we've been having with, from FIFA to the Premier League, all the way down to clubs in the Premier League itself and the EFL and further down, it's been the same response. We've spoken to sort of heads of securities at these clubs who have said, well, we know we can look, but we're a little bit scared to do so, because once we open that lid, we don't know how to deal with what's going to come out.
And Richard Cabon, you were involved in both the hugely successful Olympic bid for the UK in 2012 and the not so successful World Cup bid in 2018. So you have huge experience with dealing with the authorities. Is this welcomed by the authorities, or is this seen to be a sort of rubbing up against what are the sort of traditional attitudes that we're all told about the way authorities behave towards these things?
Shimon, I think it's welcomed. Welcome in the sense that I think the football and indeed other sports do need some assistance to be able to deal with this issue. And I think we can learn a little from history. If we look back, and I'm talking in a British context, an English context, if you look back into the 80s, when we had the real problems with hooliganism and racial abuse, as you rightly say in your intro, at that time. In fact, we were the pariahs. The British fans were the pariahs across the world, and we had to take action. And indeed, in '89, we put on the statute book here, a piece of legislation that enabled us to start dealing with some of these issues and become much more proactive, rather than what Johnson would be saying, reactive. And we had to do that with intelligence gathering. It was a different era. It was the 80s into the 90s. But I think we were reasonably successful. And we were successful because we were able to take out of society some of those that were creating and indeed leading in many ways that type of abuse and hooliganism. And we brought the banning orders in, which were a legal means of taking people out of society at certain times so they couldn't lead and interrupt the game of football, both nationally and internationally. And that word. What has been interesting, Shimon, I've just gone back and revisited some of that. And it says very clearly in the legislation that it was about violence and disorder. And when I looked through that, there are at the moment operating just over 1,700 banning orders. All of those have been for violence and no disorder. And that disorder, it says also to stop stirring up hatred. Not one prosecution, to my knowledge, not one banning order is actually operating in this area that we're now discussing. And I ask myself the question, why? And I think it is because we haven't got the evidence base in which to be able to prosecute. And what Jonathan's been saying, they're now bringing that to the party. So I think that we need probably to revisit the legislation. We probably need to strengthen that a little bit as you look at that 1989 Act that's on the statute book, but it's there in principle. And I think what Jonathan's saying is they're bringing to the world of football, to the football family, a methodology and a system to be able to get a very good evidence base in which to be able to prosecute that and take those who are perpetrators of hate and racialism.
This issue. we've got a massive growth in reporting of race crimes within society in many countries, including the UK, and football is seeing that. I think one of the striking things from the data that Sanjay's pulled together is that the growth is taking place both in the real world and online. It could have taken place in one, but it's happening in both locations. I think the survey for the real world was like over 30% of fans in the previous season had heard racism, chants, or abuse within grounds, and you've got an even bigger number in terms of growth online. So people are seeing that. And I've dealt with terrorism, I've dealt with corruption, I've dealt with organised crime. These wicked issues, you only sort them out if you get on the front foot and get proactive. You need intelligence, and you need to be able to do enforcement. In this case, the intelligence will come very heavily from looking at the online profiles of what's going on, understanding what's going on the ground, meshing those things together, and building enforcement plans that straddle real world and the virtual world. Now, I think the advantage we have in this space is these aren't organised criminals or terrorists. A lot of these people aren't the most sophisticated. Frankly, I think that some of them were behind at the back of the queue when evolution took place. So they're not going to be the hardest people to take on, but they need a systematic, determined approach. If football puts that together, and we can see ways between Quest and Signify where you can build this fused real world, virtual world approach. Football puts that together. It's probably the wages of a decent Premier League player to sort it out for the whole of football in the UK. It's not that big a deal. And we can stop players being knocked off their game by the psychological abuse they get. We can stop fans seeing this wickedness. And football can be seen to lead for communities, which is within its mission and with its ambition. This is entirely doable.
Absolutely, very, very affordable and very, very, very doable. But Jonathan, come back to you. You are the AI expert. When you're bringing artificial intelligence and machine learning into to work alongside traditional methods, how do you monitor it? How do you assess? Is it 3 strikes and you're out? What's the yardstick? I mean, there's a debate raging in the UK, in North London particularly. A particular term of endearment amongst Jews is deemed to be hugely offensive when used about other people. How does machine technology deal with that?
Well, you have to look at the issues, and that's actually the route in for us. That's the way that we deal with the issue of privacy and data protection. We're looking at the issues themselves, the types of abuse, and we come in through that angle, which means we're not doing surveillance, and we're able to actually understand what the shape of the problem looks like. So the example you gave with the Y word issue in sort of North London in Tottenham versus a number of clubs that might hurl that abuse at them, and it goes the other way as well. You pick up that issue, you look around it, and you see who's using it in an abusive way, and you then identify the sort of networks around it to provide evidence. And I would add to what Sir Mark's just been talking about. Some of the people out there. This is publicly available information, by the way. This is we are not breaking privacy settings to find this. It's out there, and as Sir Mark just pointed out, some of the people, they give you a helping hand. They will hurl some abuse out on a tweet or on Facebook, and then they will tell you in their profile, I'm so proud of the club that I work for, that I support, that this is where I sit. So you can catch me on a Saturday at 3:00 sitting over there, and I'll probably be throwing some abuse at the players on the pitch at the same time. That's a basic example. Sometimes it's a lot more tricky than that, but it happens like that. So it's possible to identify these things.
But Mark, doesn't that come to sort of pre-crime enforcement? Isn't the reliance once again on the physical to stop things happening?
I don't think it's about pre-crime. I think there are 2 levels of offending here, aren't there? The higher level is things that break the criminal law. But every football club has standards and terms and conditions that go with your ability to be a member of that club, to sit in the stands, like any private institution. And those are much tougher standards as one would expect. Now, it's perfectly reasonable to collect that material, and if people are abusive in a way that undermines other people's enjoyment of the game, even if it's not criminal, that's against the terms and conditions of the club, and you can be thrown out. And if it's appropriate, you can lose your right ever to go to a game there again. So I don't think it's about pre-crime at all. I think it's about clubs setting high standards for what they expect in the game of football. And when the line is crossed and this is a criminal offence, actually being able to give the police a better evidence package of what's going on online, what's happening in the real world, stitching that together and saying, look, here is a picture of what John Smith has been doing, then the police have got a very easy job then in terms of getting a banning order, doing a prosecution, whatever it might be. And that's a very straightforward thing to do in this space if you put dedicated assets. The last thing I would say, though, is I think there are one or two clubs experimenting with bits of this picture. No one's doing it systematically, but I don't your club. This has to be done across leagues because the problems straddle different games, straddle grounds, takes place inside the ground, outside the ground, and sort of to try and deal with it in isolation is difficult. And also, some of the tools and technologies are really not doable on a scale of one club, whereas actually the economies of scale, if you come together as a league, you can fix this, I think, very rapidly.
So, Sanjay, you agree with that? Or, you've been dealing for a long time through Kick It Out, done some amazing work and run some wonderful campaigns. And we all agree that what you fight against have no place in football. Have you experienced resistance from the authorities? Can it work? Will the proposed measures to combat and root out racism, you believe the clubs and the authorities will embrace this and make it happen? After all, Mark said it is really a fraction of their wage bill to make it all happen.
I think everyone says the right things and everyone wants the right things. So everyone will say that they want to combat racism, want to combat discrimination, they want to make football clubs a place where everyone feels belonging. But I think it's probably fair to say that the general strategy these days is more like a game of whack-a-mole. And when the mole pops up and when the issue happens, we whack the mole down. There isn't any sort of systematic, intelligence-led, let's think about how we prevent those moles from jumping up in the first place. And then there's a challenge of, well, whose responsibility is that? Is that the government's responsibility? Is it the league's responsibility? Is it the club's responsibility? And so at the moment, there isn't that connected approach, and that's really what we need, is the connected approach, because this is the kind of problem that no individual organisation can solve on its own, and we can only solve it. It's like the work on the pitch. It's solved by creativity, teamwork, and hard work. But teamwork in football is actually pretty hard. People often refer to the football family, but if it's a family, it's a pretty dysfunctional family where a lot of the members don't get on with each other.
Well, but take this just above one level, above the clubs, for a moment. And Richard, your experience with authorities, you've worked with the IOC, you've worked with FIFA, you've worked with many of the big sporting federations. Facebook employs 35,000 people as content moderators to try to root out abuse. They still can't do it. Day after day, there are groups lobbying Facebook to root out this type of abuse. Is there an appetite to fund this at that highest possible level?
I think there is in terms of the commercial world, but if I can just go back, Shimon, just a stage here, to say, the deterrent factor is very significant to fans. If you're going to ban, as we banned, people from going to a football match for 10 years, which was the maximum you could do, anything from 2 to 10 years, on hooliganism, and yes, absolutely, Sanjay's absolutely right, that was society coming together. That's the football world, the policing world, the politicians all came together and said, enough is enough. We are now going to put in a system by law to say that if you as an individual act in that way, then you can be banned from going to a football. And by the way, if you don't report to the police station or you actually act in a way that continues with that hatred or with that disruption, you're in jail. So not only do you lose a right to go to a football match, you lose your liberty as well. Now that is quite significant in my view. And if we want to get serious about this, then I think that we have to be proactive. We have to have the evidence base. We have to be proactive. We have to then take those steps. because it's that type of deterrent that I think would start having some type of effect. But it does need society to come together and do that. All I'm saying is there's an act on the statute book which actually outlines this. To date, to the best of my knowledge, there hasn't been one prosecution. There's 1,700 banning orders out in the UK. Not one of them is for hate. And yet there's an act on the statute book that allows that to happen. Yes. That's because we're not operating. Is it because we haven't got the evidence base? Jonathan's absolutely right. I think we're building up that. And I think what Mark was right about what he was saying about some of the fans' behaviour as well. So I think the opportunity is there to do that. It's the will and how you actually move that forward. If you move that then, Shimon, into that wider world, and I do think people are looking for solutions to problems, as we found with hooliganism, as we found with racialism, and it's true what Sanjay's saying, up to 2012-ish, then fine, we were moving in the right direction. Society's changed, the whole social media's changed, and we are running to catch up. As we were with the hooliganism in the 80s, we're running to catch up here now. We need to get ahead of the game.
Yes.
And I think,
can I just connect what Richard's saying to the point you were making about the investment that Facebook have made in terms of 35,000 content moderators. I think that the evidence is there, exactly as Richard says, the evidence is out there. But Facebook, for example, won't look outside of their platform. They won't connect the dots with what's going on across other platforms. And that's where you need that joined up behavior to take place. And on top of that, the people who are putting abuse out there, they're innovating just as much as the social networks are. So they've started to use emojis, for example. And Shimon, you made the point about bananas being thrown in the 1980s and targeting black players. What's the difference between that and sending a banana emoji directly to a black player right now? It's the same thing, but the content moderators and the machine learning platforms that they've already put in place to identify those things can't necessarily pick up the context.
And that way, though, we'd have to bring in government into this. And I think Richard's making that point. The reliance can't be just on the law enforcement. The laws need to change. The laws need to become much more up to date, because the problems of bringing prosecutions can't simply rely on our law enforcement under the current legislation. There needs to be a change in that. I think I would like to encourage questions to the panel from viewers as well. Please message your questions in, and we'll be able to refer to them. Sanjay, can we just broaden this discussion just a little bit to the issues of mental health on players and the duty of care and sporting associations that they have to protect athletes? There is a real effect, is there not, on the ways in which players are able to handle what they're having to handle today?
Yeah, I mean, I think potentially and in reality, yeah, there's an enormous impact on, or potentially an enormous impact on performance and the mental health of sports people, and we also have to think about where that risk crystallizes, I suppose, because in many ways, in using football as an example, the challenge is actually in inverse proportion to the attention. Most of the attention is on very, relatively few and far between incidents, high-profile incidents involving Premier League and international players. They are mercifully few and far between. It's just that they are massively high-profile when they happen. But there's enormous evidence trail around that. Those people have enormous support. Actually, if you're a Premier League player, particularly at the top end of the game, you've probably got a social media team, so you may even be insulated from all the social media abuse, and you've got all the protections that go in with that. If you go further down, right at the opposite end at grassroots, this is weekly, and it's like the Wild West out there. And actually in between, particularly from a performer perspective, it's, again, using English football as an example, it's bottom half of the Premier League and the Championship and down. You don't have that intermediary of a social media team. So what happens to you? You're seeing that. That's a sewer pipe straight into your hand, and straight into your eyeballs, and straight into your head. And so there is obviously the clubs that they work with have the duty of care, and every club that I speak to is very conscious of that. They're most conscious with social media and the reason why they're so engaged and wanting social media to do more is because of the mental health ramifications and the performance ramifications on their players. And so we need to do more and to be better as an entire industry in how we deal with that hate online, because, like I say, it is a sewer pipe straight into the eyeballs of the players.
And trying to link that with the questions that we've just been trying to address on funding issues, do sponsors have a role in this as well, Sanjay?
I think the sponsors have an enormous opportunity. Look, what does football react to? It reacts to, if you're most cynical, and I was a lawyer for 30 years, so I'm pretty cynical, it reacts to really, really, really negative PR which comes from players or fans. They are the people with the influence. Or it reacts to money. And the money is from the commercial sponsors. And actually, it will be exactly the same for social media. You know, it's as soon as we stop funding hate, you will see the investments by the social media companies in hate management increasing, because it's affecting their bottom line. So certainly the kind of campaigns that I'm thinking about going forward are about, I want to be effective. And so I think we have to involve the commercial partners in making these kinds of campaigns effective. Money talks.
Talking about being cynical, forgive me for a second for being a little, not deliberately provocative, but since the horrific events in the United States that led to the Black Lives Matter movement, we've seen athletes taking the knee, and footballers, Premier League footballers, international footballers, championship footballers taking the knee in empty stadiums. How do we think that may well play out in a stadium of 75,000 people when fans are allowed back into stadiums? Richard?
It's a good question, Timon. I would hope that the peer group pressure would be such, and I think I saw quite a bit of this, being probably one of the oldest on the panel. I've seen the whole question raised, which you, with Jonathan and the rest of them, going back to the 80s. I think bit by bit that we were getting peer group pressure to actually start rooting out racialism and hooliganism, but racism in particular. I would hope that peer group pressure would actually deal with that. I think the management of football stadiums is a lot better than it was in the 80s, and rightly so, that people can be identified and people are reported, and we saw that quite a lot. So I would hope that it would have been something that would have been welcomed by the vast majority of fans. 90% of them would welcome that as a statement that they could identify with. There you will always get that minority. There is that minority, but it is actually containing that minority to what it is, and not allowing that to infect the rest of society as well. And we have to deal with that. So I would have hoped that we would have seen some reaction. I think there's no doubts about that. But I hope that the peer group pressure on the terrace and the stands would have been one of, we don't want to be joining with you.
Absolutely, and Mark, from the physical perspective, and Jonathan from the AI or the technology perspective, how do you think this would? What does the scenario look like if abusive behaviour becomes again prevalent at a football stadium? What will happen? Will people be removed? How do you see it playing out?
I certainly see it playing out that way. I think what this illustrates, though, is that football is not just simply a recipient of standards in wider society. Football is different. It has an iconic position, and we are seeing footballers acting as leaders in a moment of in an important moment of social change. That's a fantastic opportunity if clubs and leagues really follow through behind that. And if we enforce those standards, if we follow through, because there are the intelligence systems, we can tackle the real world and the online, then there's a great opportunity. Frankly, if we don't take that opportunity, that visible leadership of fans, a small number, visible leader of players will be a seen as an affront to the small proportion of fans who are racist and problematic. And I think we'll potentially see more of a problem. Whereas actually, if we're ready for it, it's a golden opportunity for football to root it out and be seen to leading society.
Yeah, the picture is the same on social media as well. I mean, it is a small group of people who are, hurling the really nasty abuse around. Overwhelmingly across Project Restart, across the sort of 6 weeks of football that we've seen played behind closed doors, it's been huge amounts of support, and for issues like Black Lives Matter and for players who have spoken up, there's been huge amounts of support. But the abuse that does come through, it's awful, and when it gets put in front of some of these players, as Sanjay pointed out, it's going to affect performance, it's going to affect mental health, it's going to affect the relationship between the fans and the players as well, if they start to, not perform as well as they could because they're getting this kind of abuse. And there've been plenty of examples of that.
Of course. And Sanjay, sports fans are really a reflection of society. Some may say that since the pandemic, society's got a little kinder. My own experience is that was good at the beginning. It's sort of worn off a little bit. What can we do? What are the discussions that you're having at government level being done to promote greater tolerance and inclusivity, not just within the sporting community, but within the fan base as well?
Yeah, well, I think you're right, and I mentioned earlier, football is our national religion in the UK now. In a secular society, football is a national religion, and the Premier League is the opiate of the masses, isn't it? It's a global iconic brand. So what those things have an ability to do is to influence and change. Look at, I'm a positive person despite the environment in which I operate, and I'm an optimist. And I look at the revolution in kindness that COVID has brought, and that community cohesion and spirit. And I look at what Marcus Rashford has done on child poverty and school meals, and you can see the influence of football and the influence of sport as a platform and the influence of players. It was the players' decision to take a knee. It was the players' decision to wear the badges on the arms. And so I think that is the hope that fans react to their icons, and when their icons use their platforms in these incredibly powerful ways, then that creates, I think, a possibility for change. But it also has to be backed up with other things to deal with the grimier sides of society. So I've been having conversations with the government around beefing up some of the kinds of things that Richard's talked about. There are some more existing laws on the statute books, but there are also some things we need to do. The reality is that of all the things that impact our daily lives, you talk about banking, look at the development of the vaccine, life sciences industry. These are all massively regulated industries. Technology is the most under-regulated of all the industries that impact our everyday life. So part of this is we need to regulate technology much more heavily. And so something like the online harms bill that we've been advocating for, and lots of people in football have been advocating for, is part of that, to create the duty of care on social media companies and to regulate them. We can't just rely on them to do it themselves. So I think we can rely on people. We can trust the people, because the vast majority of people want to do the right thing. We might need to arm them with how we turn them from bystanders to activists, but we do need to do some regulation as well.
I've got a question that's just come in, interestingly, right on that point, from Elder Joka, who is an advisor to the Olympic Committee in Kosovo. And he's asking, really, what is the role of the people in all of this? And I think you've begun to address that, and I think that makes sense. He then goes on to talk about what are the organizations, when the organization is responsible, what are the values? So I think what we're looking at, and can we find, Richard, Mark, can we find standardized values so that we all know what we're talking about, and what we are talking about is able to be transferred beyond one particular legal geographical jurisdiction?
Mark, do you want to start?
I'll come in there. I can't start there. That's great. Policing in some of my previous roles as Chief Constable and in the Met Police as well. the public are keen to get involved with solving problems in their communities, but that doesn't tend to happen unless the police are on the pitch first. They want to see the authority figures in their community. Translating that into football, a more visible sign of football clubs setting and enforcing standards and really following through will draw the vast majority of fans into it, because they'll say, hang on, there's a standard here, there's going to be robust follow through. I'm less afraid to report that fan who sits behind me every week and says foul and obnoxious things. And so I think the sort of the silent majority can be mobilised by visible standards and determination that they see in authority figures. And I've seen that in all my career, and I think that's absolutely possible here. So that requires what we've talked about all the way through. I think this seminar is the idea that just being reactive as a club, reacting to complaints and being on the back foot isn't enough. You need to be on the front foot, chasing things down, being seen to set standards, be seen to enforce them. And then in your wake will come a massive amount of public support and information that will transform things.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that, Shimon. I think it's about leadership. And I know that when I was sports minister, I used to write round at the beginning of every season to the chairman of every football club in the professional leagues and say, just to remind them that what happens on the park on a Saturday happens in the school playground on a Monday. The impact and the power of sport, as Nelson Mandela said, the power, sport has the power to change the world, the power to actually release people. And I think that is so. And I think that football itself has got that responsibility. However, I think it is true that we collectively as politicians have to then take that and show that we are supporting sport where it is doing that type of work, that type of good in society, because it is a leader in society. As Sandra was saying, that, it's a religion here. We have to be careful we don't interfere in sport, but we have to take sport and help it to deliver what it can deliver by creating a framework of law for them to be able to use in an effective way. And that's the proactive, I think, rather than the reactive. And at the moment, we're at this crossroads with the development of new technologies to the state that it is. And John's, I think, adequately outlined that. I think we're behind the game at the moment. I think that politicians and government do have to take steps to encapsulate quite a lot of what we've been saying here and making sure that there is a framework of law to make sure that we can actually deal with that small minority in an effective way.
And ultimately, perhaps now is the opportunity. And as we draw this to a close in the remaining minute and a half that we've got, is this the opportunity? People have been forbidden from going to football stadiums for the last 6 months, and they have been it's been tragic. People are bereft by not being able to go and watch live football. This is an opportunity as we begin to start welcoming people back. Maybe we can have the cooperation that Richard, you talked about between all elements of society, working together with the technology, Jonathan, to enable fans to come back, not just physically safely, but mentally safely as well. Do you want to have a wrap-up word on that, Jonathan?
Absolutely. I mean, if we don't use this moment as a reflection point, then what are we doing? There's been such a moment to look at, certainly in the Premier League with Project Restart and the way that Black Lives Matter and the issues around it and the issues around race have affected it, with some massive incidents taking place. If we don't take note of that and then do what Richard just talked about and realise that, what goes on a park on a Sunday morning is the same that goes on in a stadium at 3 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, but also for the rest of the week on social media. It's there. It's all around. We've got to see it connected, and we've got to deal with it in a connected way.
And Sanjay, you started, so have the last word in one sentence or two.
Tackling
hopes and aspirations.
Tackling hate is not the responsibility of the Premier League, the FA, Kick It Out, clubs. It's actually all of our responsibility. It's a personal responsibility. Every one of us should be taking a stand against hate. And so the question I have for everyone else is, I know what I'm going to do, and I know what my organisation is going to do. What are you going to do?
And that's the challenge. And we are right on time. And I would like to really thank our contributors, our panelists, Sir Mark Rowley from Quest Global, Richard Caborn, former Minister of Sport from the United Kingdom, Jonathan Hirschler, co-founder and Chief Executive Officer of the Signify Group, Sanjay Bandari, Chairman of Kick It Out. I'm Shimon Cohen, and thank you all very much indeed. Back to you, Ben.